All right, welcome everybody to the Policy and Finance Committee on October 22nd, 2024. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Unless there's an objection, I'm going to go ahead and slightly tweak the agenda. I'm going to add item 7, as we usually do. And this is my fault. I forgot to make these corrections when I saw the agenda. We usually do offer public comment at this committee if there's anybody. Item 8, usually we have an other business line. I do have one item for that. And then item 9 will adjourn. So unless there's an objection to that, I'm going to go ahead and make those changes if that's good with everybody. Okay. All right. With that, you have in front of you the minutes from our September 19th, 2024 meeting. If there's no issues with that, I would take a motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. And with that, we're on to our first presentation, which is downtown parking, which maybe is Jason. I'm not sure who. Or whoever else is coming to the party. But it's their turn.
So what we have for you today is a brief presentation outlining some of the challenges that we're currently facing with our downtown parking. Sterling Emerson, our parking manager, is going to walk you through the presentation. Like I said, it will cover some of the challenges, and then we also have some policy proposals for discussion, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. All right, we're going to jump right into it here. Quick update where we've come from. November 22, we did some capital improvements that were approved. We've started that process, which includes structural, waterproofing, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, fire protection, and the facades. We did give a presentation to the Infrastructure Committee July 16th with updates on those improvements. So if anybody wants a copy of that, we do have that available. If you want to see that, it's got pictures of the improvements and everything in there and where we're at currently on those projects. Maybe. There we go. The rate structure at that time also was changed. We set minimum and maximum rates. That way we didn't have to come before you every time we wanted to make a change. At that time, there were only 2 things that were changed. That was citations and hoods. Both of those are reflected in the table below there. Everything else stayed the same and has been in place since 2010. All of those other fees are. Some of the current issues that we're facing, we have current zones that are confusing, inconsistent. We have current policies that encourage leapfrogging or parking in a spot, moving to another spot, and continuously moving throughout the day. Our on-street reserved spaces are not permitted for food trucks or similar type vendors. And then the revenue at the current rate structure does not meet our annual expenses. This is just a quick look that emphasizes the confusion in the parking. Each one of those colors represent a different time zone, a different pay zone. So as you can see, even on the same block, sometimes we have different zones. So it's very confusing when you're coming downtown if you're not familiar with it. Some of our simplification recommendations would be eliminate 24 meters on 10th Street west of Topeka Boulevard. Those meters are in front of the Walgreens and the old Pizza Hut. They are underutilized or not utilized at all. Convert all 1-hour meters to 2-hour meters. And at the same time, convert all 1-hour zones to 2-hour zones. Convert 3-hour zones to 4-hour zones. And then relax parking north of 5th Street on Kansas and north of 6th Street on other streets. The 4-hour zones would basically be to discourage all-day occupancy. We would reduce patrolling in those areas unless we got a complaint of somebody that's just there day after day and we needed to ticket it or give them a warning or something. Leapfrogging. The current code prohibits people from moving block to block within the Kansas Avenue block zone. That's a picture of the signage that's downtown on Kansas Avenue. It does not address other streets. So right now we have people that have become very accustomed to parking the 900 block of Kansas. They stay there for 2 hours. They see the officer coming down the street. They move their car around the corner to the 100 block of 9th Street. That way they start 2 hours all over again on 9th Street. So that's the leapfrogging that we're talking about. Our recommendation on leapfrogging would be, number one, eliminate the 1 hour zones. That's a short period of time for anybody to do any type of business downtown, get to where they want to be. So as we discussed earlier, going to 2 hour zones. And then to add the following language. Within downtown business district, when parking in an unpaid time zone, the allowable time for parking a vehicle will terminate when the posted time has expired. Vehicles are not allowed to move to another unpaid time zone within the downtown business district or on the same calendar date. So in effect, they'd get one free unpaid session per enforcement day. After those 2 hours, if they remain in the downtown, they'd need to move to a paid parking space or a garage at that point. Another issue we have in the code is street hoods are currently only allowed under these 11 different circumstances. Those 11 circumstances break down basically to 3 categories. Those are government agencies, which we have a wide latitude of use for, moving, demolition, or construction where there's a need for adjacent parking in front of that building, or funeral services. Under the current code, there's no permissible use for food trucks or other vendors in a for-profit use case. There's advantages and disadvantages to that. Food trucks and other venues contribute to the overall downtown experience, but existing vendors or restaurants could be disadvantaged by their presence. Our recommendation would be to adopt the following language under 1060-220B12. Persons, agencies, or business with a physical address in the downtown business district are permitted to reserve space contiguous to their business for the purpose of sales, vending consistent with their business needs. The space may not be continuously occupied for more than 10 consecutive hours. Sell or lease to a third party within the city right-of-way is prohibited. So an invitation is required, but cannot be sold, and it cannot be a permanent arrangement. Where are we at currently, revenue-wise? Currently, we are estimating a 2024 loss of right at approximately $415,000. Our 2025 budgeted loss is $454,000. At that current forecast, we'd deplete the parking reserve fund in 2027. So a few of our options. Increase revenue through change in pricing structure. Reduce expenses through reductions in maintenance and service. Or subsidize parking from other revenue services and sources. Rate structure proposal for garages. We propose to increase parking garage rates from $67.75 to $74, to establish price parity across all meters, and then to establish price parity between on-street permits and garage permits. So we'd be doing away with 50-cent meters, and they'd all be dollar meters. Right now, the 10-hour meters are 50 cents, and then the other change would be 10-hour permits are currently $44. Those would go to $74, the same as a garage permit. So you can take whichever works best for you, whether it's parking directly in front of the door to where you work, or if it's parking in a garage where it's sheltered. You have the option, but it's the same price. The garages, the proposal would be a phased price increase as additional improvements are made. It'd be an implementation of a 10% price increase with garage improvements being made over the next couple years, and then 3% inflationary increases beginning in 2026 that change every 3 years. This would be an estimated additional revenue of $162,612 at the current occupancy where we sit today in the garages, which is about 84%.
And just to clarify there, what we mean by that would be we're currently making a lot of improvements to the garage. We obviously wouldn't increase prices on our customers in the middle of those renovations. So we would wait until we had substantially completed the renovations and could reopen the garage fully. So we're not instituting a price increase while we're also inconveniencing our customers with the construction happening.
This table kind of shows what that looks like with the current pricing, the proposed pricing, and then the every 3 years. There's a few differences there. Reserved parking, in some garages we have reserved parking available. That would be $75. The 9th Street garage, that's contractually obligated to be no more than 70% of the other garages, so that's why that price looks different on it. We'd not be making changes in any of the lots. Where we're at occupancy-wise right now on lots, doesn't make sense to increase those prices at this time. On-street parking, the proposal would be implement paid parking of $1.25 per hour on Kansas Avenue, restore the $1 per hour parking on the 100 blocks of east and west of Kansas Avenue. This would give us an estimated revenue for additional on-street parking of $250,000 annually from Kansas Avenue, $100,000 annually from the 100 blocks east and west of Kansas Avenue. With the combination of that with the garage and the other price increases, the total revenue would increase $512,612, covering our shortfall of $454,775. Just a note, again, when we're talking about these increases, just like now, we would still be evenings and weekends would be free downtown. So for your evening businesses, your evening restaurants, there will still be totally free parking. Recap of our proposals. Consolidate zones and times, relax policies in underutilized areas, add language to the code clarifying the 1 free session per day, add additional circumstances to space reservations to include for-profit sales for food trucks and vendors, increase the parking garage rate from $67.75 to $74, establish price parity across meters, establish price parity between on-street permits and garage permits, implement paid parking of $1.25 per hour on Kansas Avenue, and restore the $1 per hour parking on the 100 block east and west of Kansas Avenue. And at this time, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have many, but
I do too.
who would like to start?
I think I do, but I don't know.
You want to start? You want me to start? I'm good.
I'll start.
All right.
Okay. First question was on the current meters. Can they easily be converted, or we can have expenses changing them from the 1 hour and the 2 hour to 4 hour? And I haven't been near a meter for a little while, so I haven't looked at them lately.
So our intention would be not to purchase any new meters. So in the areas where we are changing any pricing structure with the meters, they can The only issue that we would have would be we'd instate either app-based pay or install a pay station. So at this time, as meters wear out, we are not replacing them. We are just inviting people to pay by app, which I believe right now about 65% of our revenue comes from coin and about 35% comes from app. We have instituted some areas where you can only pay by app, and we have not had a large amount of complaints, and customers seem to be able to resolve that well.
Okay. I know there's people out there that would have no clue how to do the app. And I would need some coaching myself to figure it out. But I would get it figured out. Okay. What if you, and this has to do with the one session a day, what if you've got somebody who has an event going on and they come in, they unload everything and move their car, but they've got to come back and reload at the end of the day? Is that counted as 2 sessions, or how does that one work?
Without knowing specifically the type of event, yes, that would be 2 sessions. What we typically encourage is if someone is going to be parked downtown for a long period of time during the day, we would encourage that person to use a parking garage. We want the on-street to be short-term, turning over quickly. If someone is in the active process of loading and unloading and pulling items back and forth into their vehicle, they have their flashers on, for instance, our enforcement officers are going to engage with them, discuss, I'm just loading things up, and tell them, okay, well, that's understood. As long as you're actively loading and unloading, we wouldn't issue a citation in that circumstance, but then communicate that if they continue to make their rounds and see that vehicle still there with no one attending it, then they may be subject to a citation.
Okay. I'm just thinking of somebody who's got several boxes, and if they go park in the parking garage, it's going to be a pain in the butt for them to get to another spot. So it's easier just to stop, park somewhere, unload it, and then go back.
Certainly.
I don't want somebody to get in trouble for that and have to pay a ticket because they were just trying to do what was easiest for them to.
We do face that now somewhat. There are loading zones just about on every block. And the way they, like he said, address that is as they drive by, if somebody's parked there, they kind of make note of it. They won't drive by again till another hour and 15 minutes before they make their rounds again. And if that car is still there in the same spot, then they may question, okay, you've been here for an hour and 15 minutes. Are you about done unloading? How long do you expect to be? And that's when we'd address it at that point.
Okay. How are the restaurants' food pickup stalls handled? I know there's one in front of Iron Rail. Is that something they pay for? Is it something that?
They're breaking the law 100%.
So those spaces were something that we instituted during COVID. That was something that we extended to certain restaurant businesses as a way to address the fact that they were going to need to rely on carry-out business during the pandemic. We found that for the most part it worked well. There are some complaints. Obviously there's some issues associated with having those 15-minute spaces. But at this time we are not recommending any change to them. That is something that long-term that is a potential issue that we may have to address, but.
I didn't know if they were considered a hooded stall or if they were just we're trying to help you out.
So I tried to bring an ordinance that was summarily rejected because I'll just be honest, I can't stand it, and I have nothing against the businesses. They should have a spot. But right now they're breaking the law. And I'm not trying to be mean, but I mean, I can't go out there as a citizen and just put up a sign that says, I'm reserving this spot for the day. We give them the grace, understandably. I do think we need an ordinance that has uniformity, because first of all, I think it looks bad. And that's, again, not on them, but I think some of them use homemade signs, some of them use orange cones with tape across it. I think we do need an ordinance that says if you are a business and you want to establish a pickup lane, you need to request that the city do it. You need to use a sign they need to have uniformity, and it needs to have the hours and times when that, because I think it also creates confusion. Some of the signs they put up are so low, people are driving down Kansas Avenue, they're pulling into it, realizing, and then they're trying to pull out, and it's causing traffic issues. Whereas if you had a uniform sign that was up, that had the hours on it, this spot is reserved when this place is open, They wouldn't be in violation of the law, so we wouldn't have to explain to other people why we're giving them an exception, right, to the rule, even though it's not the law. And it would look nicer in our downtown if we had some structure to those spaces. So I tried to do that a few years ago. It was not approved, so maybe that's not the will. But since we have this forum, I will put it back out in the world that I would like us to look at something that cleans that up so that other businesses that don't need the spot don't just start taking advantage of that. And then we are in that position where they say, well, you let them do it, because our response, rightfully so, if your staff is, you're right, there's nothing I can do about it, right? And suddenly we've got 20% of the spots on Kansas Avenue that didn't need to be reserved. So that's my little rant on that. But I would like to see that addressed if at all possible, but I understand why it's
Yeah.
not part of this.
Because I'm looking at it as something we're not getting any income from. It's helping the restaurants, for the most part, that are the ones that have it. But it's also a spot that's not paid for at all.
Well, and I'm not even as worried about that. What I am worried about is if we have a business that doesn't open until noon on a day, but they leave the pickup sign, people could have parked there in the morning. Or vice versa, if they close at 4 o'clock, but we're enforcing stuff until 6, well, somebody could have parked there after 4 o'clock, right? And if we're going to start instituting revenue in some of those spaces, so I think to me, it's as much as looking nicer and then creating less confusion for people trying to park downtown into an understanding of what spaces they can park in at that time, as opposed to have them taking it up. Or, I don't expect the businesses to pay for that spot. I think COVID taught us that that's important. I think with our parking situation downtown, it's perfectly appropriate for them to want to pick up and drop off spot if you're one of those restaurants. But I just wish it looked nicer and there was a little more uniformity. Plus, again, I don't like laws that when we give exceptions to people. And I get why, but because again, when other people ask why they don't get the exception, kind of puts us in a tough spot.
And just one point of clarification, when we enforce those spaces, they are not tied to any one specific business. Those spaces are marked as 15-minute parking. You do not have to patronize one business in order to use that space. They are typically associated with restaurants because that's the most common use. But as long as someone comes and goes within 15 minutes, it is not relevant to us what they did in those 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, my last question I've got is, when they're not under construction, what is the occupancy of each of the garages? Do we have those numbers?
So our overall occupancy currently is 84%. That's the least occupancy. Now, on a day-to-day basis, that doesn't mean that 84% of the spaces in the garage will be occupied. That's just the amount of spaces that have a lease attached to them. So it does vary by garage. Townsite Garage is one of our lowest occupancy garages right now. Crosby Garage is occupied at approximately 120%. Currently, 512 Jackson Garage is also over capacity, so it just depends on which garage you're at. So most of our garages are around the 70% mark, with Townsite being a lower occupancy, and then the Crosby and 512 Jackson garages being well over 100% leased at this point. So it's really just about where you're located determines which garages are most occupied.
I thought of one more thing when you brought that up. How do we handle jury duty? County pays it at the going rate?
That's correct. So the county, when they send out their notices to jurors, they give them instructions to park in the parking garage, and then they receive validation stickers, which will let the customer out of the garage, and then we bill the county for the hours that the jurors used. So they pay the standard $1 per hour rate.
We have several other businesses that use those vouchers also. Different accountants and different people that hand out vouchers to their customers. So that is an option for any business that would want to do that, to encourage their people to park in the garage, and they can supplement the parking by giving a voucher then.
My most recent experience was jury duty. So that's why it came to mind. And I got out of it. I was there an hour, but I got that done. Okay, I'm done.
All right, I've got some, and they're in absolutely no particular order. Although what we just talked about, we always go back and forth, depending on who you ask to, is whether we have a parking problem in downtown, right? We have enough spaces, we don't have enough spaces. Depends on who you ask, on what day you get a different answer, or what study we look at. But I think to that, what you just addressed in terms of the occupancy is, are we leaving spaces open for public use in our garages, or are we selling them to the point where if everybody uses their permit, they will be full, and there's really actually no public parking available at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
So that's something we monitor regularly. So 512 Jackson Garage is one of our garages that doesn't have hourly customers, so it is only available to someone who is a monthly customer. Most of our garages are available to hourly customers, and that's something we evaluate, where we actually go in and look, what is the actual amount of people parked in the garage day to day to determine, are we actually hitting near capacity on any given day? And then adjusting, do we need to restrict who can reserve in which garages? Are we leaving enough that if there's a customer who's just coming in for an hour or two, that there'd be a space available, and evaluate that? So even though we can lease above the total occupancy of the garage, we still monitor to make sure if you're just someone who's arriving day to day, there's most likely going to be a spot available to you.
Okay.
I would say there are times of the year when there's less, depending on where you are. When legislature is in
Sure.
session, we have had issues where Crosby or Center City are full if there's a lot of people attending the Capitol on a given day. But for the most part, day to day, there are spaces available.
Well, and right now we have a whole garage down, so
Correct.
opening that back up will help eventually. I assume everything is on pace. I mean, we're on the plan that we put together. We're spending all the money we said we were going to spend, and we're on schedule to do all those upgrades to all those garages.
That's correct.
Okay. There'll probably be no savings. Will probably end up costing us more because that's the way the world works. I do think I was disappointed that we didn't build into the cost of that. I still think our signage is pretty bad. I mean, I do think a lot of people can drive up and down and not realize that we have those spaces just because we've, as a city, have not done a great job of putting nice, cool signs that say public parking, right? And I wish we had built that into the cost when we did those. If there turn out to be any savings as we go through this project, it would really be nice to maybe float that over to a signage fund to help maybe increase visibility of those spots to kind of alleviate the parking issue.
That is absolutely something that we intend to do, to have consistent signage that if you're just traveling down the street, you can identify which garages are city garages and that they're available for public parking.
Yeah. I mean, people laugh about it, big flashing lights. But I'm like, yeah, that's what people see, especially if they're new to Topeka. They don't realize there's parking there. When was the last time we evaluated our parking lot or our parking garage times versus, I mean, we have a lot of new businesses, some of which stay open later. And I know at one point, and I haven't looked at the times recently either, but I know at one point we had garages that closed at times that maybe didn't make, in other words, we could have locked someone out who was at the bar till closing and locked because we were shutting garages down. Have we taken a look at that to make sure everything's syncing up downtown and we're not accidentally locking people in the garage if they want to stay till closing time?
Yes, that's something that we communicate with our downtown business owners a lot. So 2 of our garages are open until 1 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights, and then 3 of our garages are open till 11 p.m. nightly. So we found that that helps us to deal with most of the nighttime restaurant and theater traffic if someone's attending an event at TPAC. We've also had discussions with the Jayhawk Theater about how our garages would fit into their events when they reopen fully. So that's something that we engage in regularly.
Okay, but I guess my question is, I mean, would we not just extend those times? I mean,
So there is a balance there. We can change the hours whenever we like. However, there's a security concern. The longer the garage is fully open and anyone can just walk in the garage, we do invite more people after hours to wander into the garage if it's not secured overnight. So there's a balance that has to be played with being available for customers and then making sure that the garage is secure.
and that makes sense. I think from an economic development standpoint, long term, if we want places to open downtown and stay open later, we're kind of harming ourselves if we're saying, yeah, but you can't park in these spaces that are right next to, and I know that's not what you're doing, but I mean, I do think long term, if we want those businesses to stay open later, we're going to have to accommodate that if we want more people to come downtown. So it's just something I've noticed. Signage, we talked about that. Talked about the pickup spot ordinance. Why a different rate for Kansas Avenue than the other meters? Why not just $1 across the board?
That would be a policy decision that would be up to the governing body. The logic behind that was simply that this is our most valuable real estate and it would be priced accordingly.
Okay. The one thing I'm a little confused about on our parking garage rates, and maybe this was the increase, I swear we approved an increase in these rates already. When we did we had whole charts that said we're going to increase the rates to this, which is going to cash flow the garages after you spend this $20 million. Did we not actually do that? Is this a new rate? Because I swear I looked at rates earlier in our last chart 2 years ago that said we were going to go up to $80 already in some of these garages. So did we not do that, or was that?
That's correct. Those price increases were put on hold.
And when was that decision? I mean, I'm not putting it on you. I'm just legitimately curious as to why
So-
that was done and when.
So that was a decision made by the city manager in consultation with some of the council members that based on the economy of downtown at the time, they didn't think it was appropriate at that particular juncture. So those were put on hold. No decision has been made since then. There's been a little bit of discussion that's happened since 2022, and that's why we're bringing it before this body again. Obviously, because as we talk about all the budgets that affect the city, we do recognize that this will be an issue within the next few years, that if we don't change the current trajectory, there will not be reserve funds available to cover the shortfall.
Okay, well, I definitely remember the meter conversation about leaving the hoods on. I mean, obviously, that conversation was not had with the whole. I will say this, regardless, I know a lot of you folks are new, different part, but I mean, to the newer city manager, I don't think that was the expectation of that governing body. I think our expectation was we spent that 20 million and we were ready to rip the Band-Aid off on those parking garage rates at that time. And so I don't know if this number, I guess, could we go back, not this second, but go back and look and see if the number you're proposing today, does this line up with the numbers we talked about 2 years ago?
So the number we discussed 2 years ago was initially going to $79 an hour. The way that that number was derived was that would allow us to start putting away additional funds on a regular basis, essentially saying the next time there's $20 million of deferred maintenance on the garages, that will allow us to build up a reserve fund in order to do so. The proposal before you today is not fully going to that $79 mark, but the $74 mark, that would cover achieving net neutrality on an annual operating basis. It would not be setting aside any funds for a future capital maintenance project. So obviously that's another policy decision, but the $74 number was derived in order to create operating neutrality going forward.
Okay, because my concern continues to be, I don't think there's any program we can rely on when we're asking our meter program to essentially support our garage program. And I think that's what got us in trouble for 20 years probably on the main, we were given so many discounts in the garages and we were hoping the meters would help fund that. Clearly that did not work. And so now the rest of us are here trying to clean up all the 20 years of that policy, right? And that's fine. That's the process. But yeah, I think I would like to at least work towards letting those garages be as much of a contained system as they can be so that the meters can pay for everything else that we're trying to do in downtown. I don't know what that's possible or what those rates look like, but I'd like to see us make that goal. I think I only had one or two more questions. When you say, I guess, define relaxing, when you say relaxing north of 5th Street and relaxing, do those have meters now? Or are those time zones? I picture them, but I can't now remember if they're meters or not.
So for example, on Kansas Avenue North, between 5th Street and 6th Street, it is a 1 hour zone.
Okay.
We would suggest making that a 2 hour zone. 1 hour, and that's actually between 4th Street and 6th Street on Kansas Avenue. 1 hour is not essentially enough time to have a meeting, so it creates a challenge for people we have some financial offices and so forth along those blocks that have said that that's very challenging for their customers. And then there's some other areas where there's 1 hour or 2 hour parking, but frankly, north of 6th Street outside of Kansas Avenue, there's really no reason for us to enforce anything that aggressively because those spaces are underutilized.
Okay. When someone's doing a construction project downtown, do we require, if they're taking up spaces, do they pay for that or do we just give them
So if
some kind
they
of
are requiring a reserved space, then they would need to reserve a space at the rate of either $20 per day off Kansas Avenue or $30 a day on Kansas Avenue. Now, if they don't need to be in one specific location, then they could have a parking lot or a parking garage space, assuming their trucks could fit in the garage. But yes, we do charge them if they do need a reserved space. Otherwise, they're subject to all the same rules and restrictions as anyone else.
And my last question is, and I honestly don't understand this, like literally, you can explain it to me like I'm in kindergarten, it's cool. I don't understand the part about allowing, so we want to give spaces to businesses for their own use as to whatever they want to do for 10 hours at a time.
So-
I honestly don't, I mean, I'm reading it, but I'm trying to picture what we're trying to accomplish there.
So the purpose of that discussion is simply to say this. Right now, there are only a few situations in which you are permitted to reserve a meter. One of those that is excluded is someone was using that space for the purpose of sales. Now, whether or not that's an appropriate use of that space is not a decision for me to make. We have had some downtown businesses who have, for example, wanted to reserve a space outside their location to bring in a food truck for an employee appreciation event. We have some other downtown businesses that have wanted to do a tent or park a van in front of their business as an extension of their business because they have a mobile unit that they can offer additional services out of. Currently, under the code, we don't have an acceptable use case to allow them to rent for that purpose. So what we were proposing was a potential solution is if that is something that the governing body would want to allow, placing some language in there that would allow someone who is already a physical downtown business owner to rent space in front of their location at the regular rates of $30 or $20 a day, provided that they are using it for their business, they're not renting it out to another party, and it's not on a permanent basis. It would have to be something that they could only occupy it for 10 hours and it would have to come down. We can't be setting up tables, we can't be erecting a structure. But for example, if they wanted to park a mobile van in front of their business and try to do additional sales, if they wanted to rent a space for a food truck to come in and sell to their employees as part of an employee appreciation event, they would be permitted to do so. This would not allow, for example, any independent vendor to just set up shop downtown without being invited by a downtown business owner. So if you're the owner of a random food truck, you can't just park in front of a restaurant downtown and start selling food. We understand there would be objections to that. So the purpose of this proposal was to say if this is something we think is allowable and permissible, how do we craft some language to keep it from being abused and still respect the spirit of businesses who just want to do extensions of their business or do something nice for their employees?
Okay, but we're still not, at this point, and I understand the advantage and disadvantage, but we're still not proposing any policies to allow a food truck to find a way to rent, to find a space in downtown. If they said, I want to come down on a Thursday, and just, we still don't have that capability, right?
That's under the current proposal, they could
Okay.
not do so unless an existing downtown business had invited them.
Okay. So if that's something we want to do, we need to look at zones maybe or something that don't impede. So they can't park in front of the iron rail or the pennant and sell, right? But maybe we don't care if they park wherever, other places. Okay, so we may need to look at kind of a zone system where that could be permissible, maybe. Okay. Okay. I know there's a lot of questions, but thank you. Councilman Miller, anything?
Thank you, Chair. So I've always been, and I still kind of am against the thought of parking being a revenue source. I understand it, I get it, but it just doesn't feel right to the public for us to be using that as a way to pull money for things. Now, the revenue neutral, that I'm okay with. That I think that should be the aim for these parking situations is because we don't have great garages. Let's be honest about it, man. We don't have great garages, but we want to. But I don't know if it's right for us to be making the public necessarily pay for that at the stalls. So I agree with what they were saying. When I look at 67 to 74, I feel shocked by it. It seems like a big jump. But if it brings us neutral and that allows us to be in a space that is not taking advantage of people, then I think that's exactly what we should be doing. I mean, is $2032, $97, I mean, is that still on par with what we think will be neutral at that point? Is that still the aim?
So the purpose of that was just to illustrate if we were to continue to raise prices at approximately 3% a year every few years,
Yeah.
that would be where we would be projecting out into the future. That's obviously something that there would be multiple discussions before we got to that point
Correct.
over the next several years. But if we want to start, putting us on a path that we are going to increase prices every few years to keep up with inflation, that's where those projections would take us.
Okay. All right, yeah, I think the rest of this is good. Yeah, that's all for me. Thank you.
Anything else? Yep.
How do we handle events at, say, Evergy Plaza or when we block up 8th Street for Irish Fest?
So
Everything's just out of commission and we don't take any revenue off of it, or what?
So they would have to apply for a special event permit to do so. When they apply for a special event permit, effectively closing down a section of the street, if they've gone through that entire process, paid the fees associated with the special event permit, we don't request that they pay for each individual space. We basically consider that if the street's closed during those times, that's covered, and that supersedes our day-to-day policies if they've been granted that special event permit.
So where does the money from the event permit go?
That would be a question for the planning department.
I believe it's just general fund.
The general fund?
General fund, yeah.
Okay. I've never even thought to ask about that, but
I believe a review of all of those fees is being done as we speak.
Yeah.
because I'm thinking like when they have Touch a Truck, they
Correct.
close up all the streets around Evergy Plaza.
And Evergy Plaza actually has some spaces that are cutback parking that they can use that they don't have to request from us. So they have cutback parking with electrical hookups that they use on a day-to-day basis that we don't interfere with. That was something that put in when that area was constructed so that they could do food truck events and they don't have to require permission from us.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions from the committee?
No questions.
All right. Any other questions from anybody else? All right. Well, thank you very much. I assume this presentation will be given at some point to the full governing body, November, December, sometime. Councilmember Hiller, did you have something to add?
I did. Thank you for this great discussion. I've been in touch with Jason prior to this. Something I wanted to throw out for all of you. They did mention in their presentation public information, but I do hope as you consider this further that you think about the big picture. One of the things that those of us who were on the council when this first started got was a whole lot of education about why you do this in the first place. And one of the key reasons is to make sure that turnover is happening in front of your businesses and retailers that are right on the avenue. And within mind that as downtown comes back, we know, I don't know what the number is, but I think we're still at less than 50% occupancy overall between 6th and 10th. So we know that there are blocks that are crowded and blocks that are not. But the vision of the whole parking system is to get people off the street and into the garage, particularly if we want them to stay more than 2 hours. And so setting up a system and kind of looking ahead and how do we do that? And one of the pieces of education that we got was that pricing is what helps people make choices. So when I look at this, and I really appreciate all the work that's been done. Spencer, you're right. We voted on the whole system to go into place in November of 2022. And then without notice to the council, it got stopped. And maybe it should have been. But anyway, here we are to look at whether from the merchants promoting to their own employees and customers, as well as our public information, if we really want people to stay for a while, how do we do that? Should Jason explained that the meters on Kansas Avenue are more than the ones on the side streets and the garages for a reason. If you go back to our original study, there was a bigger spread than they are proposing today. And I wonder if, again, we need people in the garages so we can grow into the shoes that we've created. Should we have, even just if it's 15 cents or something, should the rates in the garages be cheaper than it is to park on the street? I just want to throw that out. One of the things we've discussed along the way, even in terms of getting people to choose for hourly parking to park in the garages, is to have the first 2 hours free, particularly as we transition from having free 2 hours on the avenue and on those 100 blocks. Is that something to think about? Obviously, we need to push a pencil. If we were doing the first 2 hours free, we might need a little notch up in the rates, either in the garages or in the monthly rates in the garages or on the street to balance it. But the big issue is there's only like 2 parking spaces, or 0 to 2 parking spaces in front of each of our businesses. And so if we really want to grow and fill up our downtown, we need a system that will, by educating people anyway, will encourage them to park off the street in the garages so that it's cheaper for them and they can stay longer. So, even for the employees, I don't know that we've ever, even if we went to $80 a month, that's, if people mostly work 20 days a month, let's say on average, that's $4 a day. compared to whatever the hourly rate is while they're jumping around moving their cars. We need to think about how to get people in our Midwestern city to have a system, be comfortable and understand a system that, is that big city downtown that we've looked at, that we've designed and that we're working toward having. So I just wanted to throw out some of those things. I'm not sure there's a perfect solution, but it was talking with Seth at one point from AIM Strategies, Seth Wagner, and he said, okay, you've got these rates, you've got them all figured out, but where's the marketing plan? And he was right. And we kind of took a deep dive into that 2 years ago time, but I think we need to think about that too. So that's not really any challenges, but just some history with it. And, been working with the downtown merchants since we started as well. So any questions of me? I know that's, you might not, but.
Thank you, council member.
Sure. Thank you.
Staff wants to add? And you're free. Now it's Josh's turn. All right, a presentation on the Q3 General Fund.
Good afternoon, everybody. So about a month ago, which is hard to believe, Councilman Dobler kind of asked, where are we looking at on our general fund towards the end of the year? And we wanted to come back to this committee and eventually the full council to give an update on where we're trending ahead to end the year in our general fund. So high level overview, we're going to start with the revenue side. Obviously, 80% of our revenue, as we learned in our kind of public engagement sessions this summer, come from sales tax, property tax, and our franchise fees through Evergy and One Kansas Gas. 3 things to note on that. Our sales tax is down compared to budget, but it's where we're trending at right now is 2% ahead, about 2.25% ahead of where we were last year. Earlier in the year when we were going through the budget, we were much less than that. We were less than 1%. So sales tax is trending back upward in the area, which is good, but we're still behind compared to budget. One thing I wanted to note on the second row there for property tax, you see that we're projected to collect more than what was budgeted. That's not because we did anything with the mill levy. We assume a 95% collection rate. That's us collecting more than the 95%, which is good, and also includes some delinquencies, revenue collection. So nothing to fear there, and that's just we're anticipating more revenue because we set a 95% collection rate. And then lastly, for the franchise fees, the Evergy collections are basically flat compared to last year, while natural gas is down. That could be just due to timing abilities and Kansas Gas doing less work through the year. But the one thing to note is last year when they set the budget, they anticipated huge growth in that, and that has not happened. That's stayed essentially flat. So to where, in summary, we're not projected to reach our budgeted revenue of $113.6 million. Right now, we're going to be right around $112.5 million on the general fund side. So that's the revenue side of general fund. I didn't know if we want to stop for a slide-by-slide question or we want to save questions at the end. Doesn't matter to me, but I don't know what's easier for you guys.
I guess keep going until
Okay.
someone has a question, and they can interrupt you if they really can't wait till the end.
Okay, no,
It's fine.
perfect. So on the expense side, so obviously most of our expenses in the general fund are personnel. It's about 75%. That is severely under budget in paid out expenses, obviously, because we've been down a number of police officers and then also a number of department head positions that were previously budgeted, such as the DEI director, the finance director, the HR director for a little bit in the first quarter this year, city manager half the year, engineers. So we've had a numerous amount of vacancies in the general fund where we've been able to save. And then on the flip side of that, we've been spending more in our contractual and commodities line items. And so what that stems from is mainly from the hotel drawdowns that we've been spending. So when the budget was set last year, it wasn't quite formalized what the hotel impact would be on our specific operating fund. We only knew that we were going to bond the project on paper, which is paid out of our debt service fund. So a lot of those expenses that we've been over on in some of those line items are due from the hotel not being budgeted for, just due to timing. And some of it's been also, as we alluded to, the prisoner contract with the county, that's projected to be $400,000 over what was expected to be budgeted for in 2024. So other than that, there's not much, and you guys, it's not on the screen, but on the department side, no departments are expected to be over budget. It's just mainly from unanticipated, well, not unanticipated, but unbudgeted expenses in the hotel and then underruns from the county. So we get this question quite a bit. How does this affect our reserve balance? So right now we're projected to be $2 million under budget on the year. Now, the governing body last year did set the budget about $1.3 million expenses over revenue to spin down some of that reserve because we had a large excess. So we're kind of close to that target, but just due to sales tax being so far down and franchise fees, due to what was initially anticipated, we're a little behind that target. So, and I know the second table is kind of complicated, but our audited figure for 2023 ending general fund balance was about $39 million. We transferred about 15 million of that into the unassigned reserve, and then to where we'd have about $24 million on hand. And that is a typo on the fourth line. It should be the 220,026, not 2.2 million, but only off $150,000, to where at the end of 2024, we're projected to have about $22 million of general fund reserves, to where that's about 17% of our 2025 expense budget, which is above our 15% policy. And that's the packet you guys have out, but that's just a high level overview. There are some things we can do that we're eventually going to go back to the Public Works Infrastructure Committee is on this page. You see that Dreams is paid out of the general fund for $1.5 million worth of cash projects. So one proposal that I thought Councilman Hiller presented that was a good idea is we can convert some of those general fund expenses to citywide half-cent sales tax to a tune of about $800,000 or $900,000. Now the good news about that is this $2 million of deficit that you'd see would go down to about 1.3 to where we anticipated being at. And we've had such an accumulation of citywide half-cent sales tax funds to where the fund could support that. And it also doesn't allow us to take on any additional bonding. So we're spinning out of one place with an excess fund balance to help out another place that is kind of more strapped for cash. So that's something we're going to try to take back to the PWI committee. I think they meet November 19th. So that will be presented there. And that's all I have. And this is just kind of a good start. If the committee would like to see anything more in detail in the future, we're all ears for that as well.
Where did we spend you mean $111,000 at the zoo for this year?
So, no, good question. So that's for insurance. And so for employee, the way
because we still have employees.
We still had employees at the time, so we allocated insurance based on.
And we still may for a few years because that's to preserve, right, their capers and.
Correct. We actually do not have any zoo employees anymore.
Okay, they're all now gone, officially gone.
So we proportionally, by where employees were stationed at, split out where insurance would be charged to. So the zoo, if we were doing this a year from now, the zoo would be zero.
No, yeah, I know we did that because we didn't want those employees to be damaged with their retirements for the transition. Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, looks good to me. Any questions from the committee? All right. Good, Michelle? Okay. All right. Thank you, Josh. All right. We will move on to our 2025 legislative agenda. The language you have in front of you is considered the quote-unquote final language to present to the governing body. It mostly encapsulates everything we've discussed. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I will go over it. Anything that's in the black ink, I'm not going to talk about because that's been current policy and there's no changes there. Anything in red ink is stuff we've sort of already talked about. Most of it we've agreed to. Some of it's a little new at the request of some outside agencies, so we'll make sure we cover that. The first three are ones we've talked about ad nauseum, and I don't need to go over them 50 times, but ones relate to our asking the state to stop taking sales tax away from us, asking the state to continue to look at property tax valuation system, since they created the system that we all have to live under. We'd like them to take a look at that system. And then the revenue neutral process, asking them to hold themselves to the same accountability standard they hold us to, i.e. they should have to take a revenue neutral rate vote also, and then work on us with ways to navigate that rate. So those are the first three. We talked about those early, and there were no real issues there. There's now this new section under housing. Recognizing that residents have a right to live in safe, affordable housing, we support legislation allowing cities to require mandatory inspections for landlords accepting public funds, strengthening protections for enforcement of equitable interest in contract for deed arrangements, and that would give, in order to decrease blight in neighborhoods and return houses to productive use. The concern has been that even though they get money, it doesn't always mean we can go in, because there's some state laws that create some confusion there. Some federal law stuff too, but we can't control that. But we certainly can ask the state to fix their part, because if you're going to take money from us, we feel like we should be able to go in and inspect those homes, especially if they fall into disrepair in those rental situations. And so we want to work with that on the state. The firefighter helmet cameras, the language now reads, we support the ability of local governments to determine when and how helmet cameras and drone audio-visual recordings will be used by firefighters in the course of responding to public safety calls, including the regulation of public access to those recordings, balancing the needs of public safety professionals and the individuals whose images and sounds are captured in the recordings. I will say one difference in this language of what we support than when we originally discussed it was, we're not really asking the state to tell us what we have to or don't have to do with it. We're asking them to give us the leeway to make that decision at the local level. So for cities who want to be a little more restrictive, they can go fight those fights. For those who are a little more open about it and okay with it, they can do it. So we did try to make that language, and that's what we would support up there, is just give us that flexibility locally to make that decision. Don't mandate one way or the other at the state level as they work for it. And I can tell you this is an issue that the firefighters will be pursuing this session up at the Capitol. So it's definitely going to be a bill at the state legislature. We toned down the law enforcement officer age requirement to simply state that, let them join the academy so that when they'll turn 21 when they can hit the street. So that it would have to be timed that way, as opposed to allowing, which we started, I think, 18-year-olds. We moved from that pretty quick, but at least this means if you're 20 and you're getting close, you're almost 21, you could at least start the training, enter the program, and be on the street at 21. These last three are new. I don't think they're controversial, but I've said that before, so who knows? One was a request from the MTAA for us to include in this, saying recognizing Topeka is located in an ideal location to support, I don't even know what that is, but initiatives. I know what it is, but I don't know how to pronounce their little NIAR initiatives in Wichita and Salina. We support legislative efforts by the MTAA to receive a budgetary appropriation for expansion into the field of aircraft maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Essentially, the MTA is working with the state to get money for the airport, essentially. Some of that money is going to Wichita, some of it's going to Salina. It is an initiative. The state has recognized Topeka as an important piece of the, whatever we call it, the area of corridor, thank you, that was the word I was looking for, of that corridor. That's the good news. But they just wanted us to be able to support their efforts to continue to get those funds and prioritize Topeka when appropriate in that program. Next one is the local government employment grants. Vacancies in local government positions negatively impact our community, causing delays in services. We support legislation to create programs that and that should probably be incentivize, so we'll change that. Individuals in hard-to-fill professions to stay in Kansas and work in the public sector. This is an issue for every city, obviously, in the whole state of Kansas. It's just as troubling, though, when you're the capital city and you still can't get people to come work here, right? The state has similar programs for other fields, nursing, school teachers. We'd like them to look at a similar model for just people who want to come work for government, right? To incentivize them to stick around for more than a year. And so this is an effort to get the state to look at some incentive programs on their level to get people to stay in Kansas. Obviously, selfishly, we hope that's Topeka. And then the last one was asked to be included from the HRC, Relations Council, I guess last week. And it's regarding the Crown Act. And it is that we support legislative efforts to pass at the state level the Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair Act, prohibiting race-based hair discrimination. I can tell you this has been introduced in the legislature several times. I won't say that they're against it. They just aren't for it enough to have gone far. I know Senator Falscadeau out of Wichita has put it forward several times and a few others. And so this was their request to see if Topeka would be willing to support it. So those ones are 3 things we have not talked about at all. I don't have any issues with those 3. And I think the language that we did on the firefighter helmet cams and the law enforcement addresses the concerns others on this committee had and other council members about putting us in too much of a box or restricting us to only one path or the other. I think it gives us more flexibility. So I don't know, thoughts, concerns, questions? Goal would be for us to approve this and then get it on the council for a November discussion and then another week of approval so that our lobbyist and everybody else could have it heading into December before the session starts in January. So appreciate the city attorney's work on this. She added some of that and did some fast writing when the NTAA and the Crown Act came up. We got those thrown in there pretty quick, so good work there. All right, well, then I would move to approve.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone object? I guess not. There's only 3 of us and we all said aye. You didn't? It's not in your book. Would you like a copy? You should have said that before you voted. Now you may not know what you voted for. It's too late now. I'm not taking your vote back.
Yeah.
You can have my copy. I already know what it says. You can read it later and be like, oh my gosh, why did you make me vote for this? All right, with that, I did add, is there anyone here who has any public comment? We can follow the same rules as the council. So 4 minutes, if now, speak up. No? All right. Other business, I have one item. I'd like to direct staff to work on this. TPAC has asked, and I have no issues with it, so I'm proposing to extend the common consumption area to extend to in front of the TPAC property. It doesn't need to go all the way to the courthouse or the whole both sides of the building. I think we can keep the map pretty simple that you could just walk down 8th Street. I guess if we want to extend it to the other side of the street so you could walk from, I'll leave staff to look at that map. If you want to go from 7th across, I don't know the best answer to that. But they would like that flexibility. I'm told we still won't be allowed to bring it into city council meetings, but that's okay. At least we can drink out front right before we go into the council meeting if we want. So they've made that request. Again, I don't have an issue with that, so I'm happy to sponsor that. But if we could have staff work on what that map would look like, and then it could come back to this committee when that's ready for us to discuss and see if we're okay with it. I'll throw that out there. Anything else anyone wants to bring to the good of the cause? Yeah, we're going to get to that. I forgot and accidentally skipped it. We're going to come back, but on the other business. No? All right, so ARPA. There's really not a presentation here. I guess Josh can correct me if I'm wrong on anything I'm about to say. We've done audits of everyone, not everyone, but we've done a lot of audits. I think we asked for 5. They did more than half, I think, which is great. They all came out very well. So the public can be very confident that the money has been spent the way it was supposed to be spent. I think that's very important for the public to know that we have done that follow-up. To this date, we've only had concerns with 1 allotment left. I think those concerns have been alleviated. They are taking steps on their front to work on something. If not, we have a backup plan, correct, to preserve those dollars. So I guess the message that needs to go out to everybody is there are no extra ARPA funds. There's not going to be anything left on the table. There's nothing coming left back to the pot. So for anyone who is hoping and dreaming that there would be extra money, it's not there. To the benefit to the something of all the other groups out there. They have done exactly what they said they were going to do. They have spent the dollars the way they told us they were going to spend them, and they have done a really good job of making sure they were encumbered before the deadline of the end of this year. So congratulations to all those groups, and I thank all of them for doing all of that and spending those dollars wisely and following through on their promises. So I guess I want that message to get out there, that there won't be any extra money for us to discuss. I will suggest to staff, particularly communication staff, that's $10 million out in the community. It's done a lot of really good things. I mean, just last week they did the ribbon cutting for the bus that will be able to go around and do not just HIV testing, but other testing and positive connections. I mean, that came as a result of these ARPA fundings. There's a lot of other groups. So I would suggest maybe sifting through those and doing some follow-up. And I know we're doing a really good job lately of putting videos out there of things we've done in the community. And those seem ripe for showing people exactly how those dollars have benefited the community as was actually intended. And it would be good for those groups to get some exposure to the work they're doing too. So I would think that would be a positive. So that would be my only suggestion to staff, is something if you want to go tout that a little bit. It's out there ready to be touted. I know that one of the groups had a request. I don't have it in front of me, that I don't think we're going to have an issue with. If we could reallocate, their funds will still be spent the same way, but we need to tag them differently, and I'll get that information to staff. But they're in the middle of it's the Grocery Oasis. But in order to get a grant, they need us to sort of categorize how the dollars were given to them so they can get the grant to match the money we're giving them so they can buy all the stuff they want to buy with our money. So I will get that sent to Josh, and you can decide whether we're good with that, but I think we are. If it needs to come back before this committee for an approval, we'll bring it back to you. If not, I'll just let staff make that decision and do what they need to do. But I don't want them to lose matching funds. Yes, sir.
How soon is that going to happen?
The grocery store, like the whole thing in general, they're a year away. They're getting some federal grants right now.
They're a year away from requesting for the grant?
No. They're requesting the grant now. That's why they need this reallocation.
Okay.
And I'll have to look it up. I should have looked it up before I came. That's totally on me. I meant to print it out. In fact, I think I did print it out, and it's sitting in my printer at the office. So I messed that up. But if you give me 30 seconds, I can probably find it. Too many emails. So many emails. Well, I'll have to, here he is. So they'd like to take a portion of the money we're giving them, not the full amount, $25,000 of the $600,000 we're giving them, and they need to spend it on engineering costs because they have to do an engineering assessment to get this grant, which is a matching grant for the other $600,000. So their request is because that wasn't we specifically gave it to them to purchase equipment. So they'd like to know if we would give them a permission to carve out $25,000 of that $600,000 to pay the engineer to do all the engineering costs they need to qualify for these grants that they've applied for, one of which I think they're guaranteed. They just have to get that work done first. So
on our end, are we allowed to do that?
We are allowed to do that. As a committee, we are allowed to. I mean, if we're okay with that and give staff that direction, we are allowed to do that. That's perfectly permissible within what the money can be spent for. And to me,
make sure.
My perspective, the reason I'm okay with it just for is if that's what it takes for them to actually then be able to spend the other $575,000 we're giving them, plus get those matching funds, that seems like a very reasonable. We did work very hard in that process not to let money be spent on salaries and certain overhead, but I understand their conundrum on this one, and I think the way they've pitched it is that this gets them what they need. So I would be okay with that if everyone else is okay, and then I don't think they need a vote from us. I think staff can just know that that's okay, and I'll forward this to Josh. And let staff know to go ahead and work with them on that. Because that's probably just an addendum that needs to be made to the application, I'm guessing, or something. Are we good with that, everybody? You okay with that?
Staff? Yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay. No, I'll make sure everyone else is good with it, so. All right, perfect. Well, then they'll be happy to know they can do that. Anything else we need to add about ARPA? I mean, I think at this point, the ARPA book is closed on those funds unless there's a problem or situation arises. And I appreciate everybody's staff's work on it the last couple of years, especially since it was a transition and we went from Team 1 to Team 2, and Team 2 had to figure out what the heck Team 1 had been doing all of it for 2 years. So I appreciate all that work on that. Anything else? Questions, comments, concerns, issues you like to just randomly rant about? It's all good. All right. Well, with that, anything staff needs to add? All right. Well, we are done.
Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead. Nope. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.